A fragile photograph rests on a steel archive table. Two boys. Neatly dressed. Calm faces. The year, 1888. For more than a century, no one questioned it. Until a restoration expert enlarged the image. Closer. Sharper. And there, in the painted studio background, a symbol. Small. Precise. Intentional. Not part of the set. Not a mistake. A mark belonging to a society that officially never existed. The expert's hand stopped moving. The room fell silent. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And the boys in the photograph suddenly looked like they were waiting for someone to finally notice. In the basement of a provincial historical archive, where fluorescent lights buzz softly and the air smells of dust and metal shelving, a junior archivist pulled open a drawer that had not been touched in decades. The label on the front was faded, written in a hand long dead, miscellaneous portraits, 19th century. Inside lay dozens of photographs stacked like forgotten playing cards. Most were nameless. Unremarkable. Time had turned their faces into anonymous ghosts. Near the bottom of the drawer, a thicker card caught the archivist's fingers. Its edges were curled, the paper slightly warped from humidity. Two boys stared back from the image. They stood shoulder to shoulder, dressed in stiff wool suits, hair carefully combed, boots polished for the occasion. A typical studio portrait from 1888. The kind families once commissioned to mark friendship, youth, or the simple pride of survival in an unforgiving century. On the back, written in fading ink, were two first names. No surname. No address. No record number. Just names, almost affectionate in their casualness. The archivist hesitated, sensing the strange incompleteness of it. Most portraits in the collection carried studio stamps, photographer signatures, or family notes. This one carried almost nothing. It was a photograph that had lost its story. Later that week, the image was delivered to a digital restoration lab. The archive had begun a project to preserve fragile glass plate and card photographs before they decayed beyond saving. The restoration expert placed the portrait beneath the scanner. A soft blue light swept across the boys' faces. Their expressions sharpened on the monitor, one smiling faintly, the other serious, as if uncomfortable in front of the camera's long exposure. The expert leaned closer to the screen. The background, a painted studio scene of a garden wall and vines, seemed ordinary. Standard backdrop. Nothing special. She adjusted contrast levels, as restorers do, searching for hidden damage, dust, scratches. Then she increased magnification, examining the edges where backdrop met frame. Her hand froze on the mouse. There, barely visible beneath layers of paint texture and time, was a shape. Not random cracking. Not a stain. A deliberate mark. A carved geometric symbol etched into the wall of the painted scene, as if someone had scratched it into the studio backdrop before the photograph was taken. Precise lines. Purposeful angles. She zoomed in again. The symbol sharpened. And in that moment, what had been an ordinary forgotten portrait became something else entirely, the first doorway into a mystery that had slept, unseen, for over a century. The restoration lab grew quiet in a way laboratories rarely do. Machines continued to hum, scanners continued their slow mechanical sweeps, but the people in the room had stopped moving. The expert stared at the enlarged section of the photograph, unsure whether to trust her own eyes. She adjusted brightness, inverted tones, filtered noise. The symbol remained. Clean. Intentional. Undeniably there. She printed the zoomed-in fragment and carried it down the hall to the archive's research department. Paper rustled. Chairs creaked. A senior historian with wire-framed glasses accepted the sheet, studying it beneath a desk lamp. The yellow light made the symbol look even sharper, as though it had been freshly carved rather than hidden in an image from 1888. He reached for a thick reference volume. Then another. Pages turned slowly, reverently. Minutes passed. Then his finger stopped on an illustration inside a book about prohibited European secret orders of the late 19th century. The symbol matched. Not approximately. Not vaguely. Exactly. The historian exhaled through his nose, a sound halfway between disbelief and concern. That marking, he said, tapping the page, belongs to a fraternity that was officially dissolved in the 1870s. Its activities were declared illegal. Its records destroyed. Its members either disappeared into exile or into silence. The room felt colder after those words. The expert looked back at the photograph, the two boys, innocent in their stiff suits, posing politely in a commercial studio. And yet, behind them, a forbidden emblem had been deliberately included. Not hidden in darkness, not tucked into a corner by accident, but placed where a careful observer would one day find it. Questions multiplied instantly. Who arranged the backdrop that day? Was the photographer involved? Did the boys know what stood behind them? Or were they being used as silent carriers of a message meant for future eyes? The historian requested the original photograph. Under magnifying glass, he confirmed what the digital enlargement had revealed. The paint of the studio wall had been scratched before the photo session. The symbol had been present in the physical scene, not added later. Someone had prepared it. Someone had planned it. A note was added to the archive's database. The portrait was moved from miscellaneous to restricted research. Calls were made. Emails sent. Another expert in 19th-century underground societies was contacted. A small circle of scholars formed around a single photograph. What began as a routine preservation task had turned into a historical anomaly. A studio portrait from 1888 carrying the insignia of a band order. Two unnamed boys at the center of it. No accompanying records. No explanation. By evening, the historian locked the photograph in a protective case. As he closed the drawer, he paused, looking once more at the boys' faces. They no longer looked ordinary. They looked like witnesses to something the world was never meant to remember. The next step in the investigation began in a room that smelled of old leather and dry paper. The historian placed the enlarged printout of the symbol on the table beside several open reference books. Across from him sat a specialist in 19th-century clandestine movements, a woman who had spent 20 years studying organizations that existed only in whispers and erased documents. She did not speak at first. She simply looked. Then she traced the lines of the symbol with her finger, careful not to touch the paper directly. "I've seen this once before," she said quietly. "In a confiscated notebook from 1883. The owner was arrested. The notebook disappeared from public record. Only a copied page survived." She opened a folder and slid forward a fragile photocopy. The same symbol appeared in faded ink, drawn in the margin of a coded text. The match was perfect. The air in the room felt heavier now, as if the past itself had entered. The specialist explained that the society attached to the symbol was not merely secret. It was actively suppressed. Its members believed in radical ideas that threatened monarchies, churches, and governments of the time. Meetings were held in abandoned estates. Initiation rituals were rumored to be dangerous. Police raids had dismantled the organization, at least officially. But suppression does not always mean extinction, she said. Some groups went underground. Others hid in plain sight. The historian looked back at the portrait. Two well-dressed boys. A commercial photography studio. A painted backdrop. The safest possible setting for a hidden message, because no one thinks to search for secrets in family photographs. They began reconstructing timelines. The year of the portrait, 1888. The last confirmed sighting of the Forbidden Society, 1886. Close enough to overlap. Close enough to suggest continuity. The specialist turned the photograph upside down, studying the studio floorboards visible at the bottom of the image. Photographers often reused backdrops, she said. But carving a symbol into one is risky. It suggests someone with access. Someone inside the studio. Or someone who arranged the sitting with intent. That realization shifted the mystery. This was no accidental inclusion. No teenage prank. It was coordinated. Deliberate. Purposeful. The historian made another discovery. On the back of the portrait, beneath the fading names, was a barely visible indentation, the ghost of earlier writing erased or worn away. Using sidelight photography, they revealed partial letters. Not names. Numbers. A date. And beneath it, the same symbol again, drawn lightly in pencil. The boys had not just stood in front of the mark. They had been marked by it. At that moment, the case moved beyond curiosity. It became an active historical investigation. Institutions were notified. Funding was requested. The portrait was no longer a single object. It was evidence. And the two boys, frozen in silver and paper, were no longer anonymous friends. They were participants in a story that history had tried very hard to bury. The breakthrough came not in a grand discovery, but in a quiet archival routine. A junior researcher, tasked with cross-checking handwritten names from unidentified photographs, sat before a microfilm reader late in the evening. The building was nearly empty. Only the soft mechanical whir of spinning reels kept her company. She typed one of the first names from the back of the portrait into the 19th century registry database. Dozens of unrelated entries appeared. Too common to trace. But beside the second name, something unusual surfaced, a brief municipal record from 1891, listing a teenage boy reported missing. No photograph. No cause. Just a note, asterisk, family requests no further inquiry. Asterisk. The researcher printed the record and carried it to the lead historian the next morning. The coincidence was too sharp to ignore. A missing boy. Same first name. Same era. Same region where the photograph had likely been taken. A search warrant was filed to access sealed municipal boxes from the district. 2 days later, in a back room filled with iron cabinets, the historian unlocked a container that had not been opened since before the First World War. Inside were personal effects surrendered to authorities after the boy's disappearance. Clothing. A pocket watch. And a small leather notebook. The historian held it with gloved hands. The cover was cracked. The clasp rusted shut. When opened, the pages revealed tight handwriting, hurried, youthful, emotional. The diary belonged to one of the boys in the portrait. Most entries were mundane, school complaints, friendship notes, childish sketches. But scattered between ordinary sentences were strange interruptions, lines written in symbols rather than letters. Diagrams in the margins. The same geometric mark that had been carved into the studio backdrop. The diary was handed to a cryptography consultant. Under digital scanning, patterns emerged. Certain symbols repeated in structured sequences. This was not nonsense. It was a code. As translation began, fragments of meaning surfaced. Asterisk, meeting at the old house. Asterisk. Asterisk, they say the order lives on. Asterisk. Asterisk, we must remember. Asterisk. Then the final entry. The handwriting shook. The words slanted downward as though written in haste. Asterisk, they are watching. If this book is found, tell my friend to stay away. Asterisk. The entry ended abruptly. No signature. No farewell. The room where the diary was read remained silent long after the last line was translated. Now the photograph had a voice. A living testimony from one of the boys. A child pulled into something far larger and darker than himself. The Forbidden Society was no longer an abstract theory. It had touched real lives. Young lives. The historian closed the diary gently. 2 friends in an 1888 portrait. One vanished 3 years later. A code hidden in his handwriting. A symbol carved behind them like a warning. At this point, the investigation crossed a threshold. It was no longer about what the photograph contained. It was about what the photograph had tried to protect. With the diary translated and the coded passages partially understood, the investigation turned outward, away from the photograph, away from the archive, toward the physical world that had once surrounded the boys. One line in the decoded text repeated more than once. Asterisk, the old house beyond the black pines. Asterisk. It was vague. Almost poetic. But 19th century land records were precise, and the historian knew where to look. In regional property registries from the 1880s, only one estate carried a local nickname matching the description, a manor abandoned after a mysterious fire in 1890. Old maps were unfolded on a long table. Survey lines. River bends. Woodland borders. The estate sat exactly 1 day's travel from the town where the missing boy had lived. A field team was assembled. They arrived at the site in early morning fog. Black pines still stood there, tall and tightly packed, muting sound. Beyond them, the remains of the house emerged, scorched stone walls, collapsed roof beams, ivy claiming everything. Fire investigators from the Historical Crimes Division walked the perimeter. The official record from 1890 had declared the blaze accidental, a stove left burning overnight. But as they sifted through the ruins, they found no trace of stove remains. No chimney damage. No fire pattern consistent with accident. Instead, burn marks climbed upward from the floor, deliberate ignition points. Someone had wanted the house destroyed. Inside the debris, archaeologists uncovered fragments of objects sealed beneath collapsed flooring, metal pendants bearing the same forbidden symbol, pages of half-burned documents, and a wooden box blackened by fire but still locked. When opened, the box contained a collection of names. Handwritten lists. Some crossed out. Some underlined. And at the top, the two first names written on the back of the 1888 portrait. The link was now undeniable. This estate had been a gathering place. A meeting site for the Forbidden Society. The diary's old house was real. The symbol in the photograph was not symbolic, it was a membership mark. And the fire that erased the house had also erased almost every trace of the group's existence. Almost. Because someone, before everything burned, had posed two boys in a photography studio and placed the society's mark behind them. A quiet act of defiance. A time capsule hidden in plain sight. The team stood in the ruins as the wind moved through the pines. No birds. No distant roads. Just silence. The historian looked down at the recovered pendant in his palm. A society erased. A house burned. A child missing. A diary warning. The photograph had not merely survived history. It had survived an attempt to destroy history. And now, with physical evidence in hand, the investigation moved to its final phase, finding the living descendants who had inherited a secret they never knew existed. Finding the descendants was the most delicate part of the investigation. The historian now carried evidence that connected living families to a forbidden society, a burned estate, and a vanished child. This was no longer only about the past. It was about people still alive, unaware that their family history held a locked door. Using census archives, church baptismal records, and marriage registries, a genealogist traced the surviving family line of the second boy in the portrait, the one who had not appeared in missing persons records. His life had continued. He had married. He had children. His name carried forward through generations, quiet and ordinary. After weeks of tracing, a modern address surfaced. A letter was sent first, neutral in tone, cautious in wording. It asked whether the family possessed any old photographs or documents from the late 19th century. No mention of secret societies. No mention of missing boys. Just a request for historical collaboration. The reply arrived 3 days later. Yes, it read. We have a portrait of my great-grandfather as a boy. It has always hung in the hallway. No one knows much about it. The research team traveled to the house. It was a simple suburban home. Children's shoes by the door. A dog barking in the yard. The contrast with the burned estate ruins was jarring, life continuing, normal and unaware. Inside, the descendant, a woman in her 30s, led them to the hallway. There, framed behind clean glass, was the same photograph. The same two boys. The same painted backdrop. The same symbol, though invisible to the naked eye. The historian explained carefully. The lab enlargement. The symbol. The diary. The burned house. The missing friend. The woman listened without interrupting. When the historian mentioned the diary entry, "Tell my friend to stay away," her hand went to her mouth. "My grandmother," she said slowly, "used to say that our family never spoke about a childhood friend my great-grandfather lost. She said his name was forbidden in the house. No one had believed the story. It had been dismissed as a family quirk. An exaggeration. A superstition. Now it had context. The photograph was removed from the wall and scanned again on site. The descendant watched as the symbol emerged on the screen. A secret that had lived in her home her entire life, unnoticed. Tears formed in her eyes. So he knew, she whispered. He knew what happened. The historian handed her a copy of the diary page. The coded writing. The final warning. A boy's voice reaching across 130 years. The descendant placed her hand on the glass of the framed portrait. It feels like he left this for us, she said. So we would finally understand. In that moment, the investigation stopped being an academic pursuit. It became personal. Human. A story of children drawn into dangerous ideals, of silence passed through generations, of truth hidden not in grand monuments, but in a simple photograph on a hallway wall. The last witness to the secret society was no longer a ruin or a diary. It was a family, finally meeting the past they never knew they carried. The final stage of the investigation did not take place in an archive, a laboratory, or the ruins of an estate. It unfolded in a small exhibition room, where the portrait of the two boys now rested inside a climate-controlled glass case. Visitors moved slowly around it, leaning in, trying to see what the naked eye could not, the symbol that had once slept invisibly in the background. On the wall beside the photograph, enlarged prints displayed the carved mark, the diary fragments, and images from the burned estate. Together, they told a story that official history had never recorded. At the opening of the exhibition, the descendant stood quietly near the back of the room. She watched strangers study the image of her great-grandfather as a child. For the first time, his silence had been given a voice. The historian addressed the small audience. This photograph, he said, is proof that even when institutions erase records, when fires consume buildings, when governments suppress movements, memory finds another way to survive. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Two boys once stood in a photography studio. Someone placed a forbidden symbol behind them. A message meant for a future observer. And more than a century later, that observer arrived. The restoration expert stepped forward next. She described the moment she enlarged the image, the instant the symbol appeared, the sudden understanding that she was not merely preserving a photograph, she was awakening it. In the audience, people whispered. Some leaned closer to the glass case, as if expecting the boys to blink. But the true impact of the discovery lay beyond the exhibition walls. Historical journals published revised accounts of the banned society. Official records acknowledged its continued underground existence beyond the date previously believed. The burned estate was reclassified, not an accident, but a deliberate destruction of evidence. A missing boy was officially listed as connected to the incident, closing a case left open since 1891. A photograph had rewritten a chapter of history. And emotionally, something deeper occurred. The descendant later spoke to the research team privately. I used to walk past that portrait every day, she said. I never thought it carried anything. Now I feel like my family has been carrying a burden without knowing why. And now, it's lighter. The historian placed a copy of the restored photograph in her hands, this time with the symbol clearly visible. No more hidden truths, he said. Outside the museum, evening light settled over the city. Life moved on, traffic, voices, footsteps, ordinary, unaware that a century-old silence had just been broken. Two boys in 1888 had looked into a camera. They had left behind a warning. A record. A trace. And in the end, the photograph did what it had waited 137 years to do. It made history remember what history tried to forget.